You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. My guest today is Ed Mendoza. Ed is a farmer, poet, activist, and permaculturist who has been gardening since he was 10 years old. In this podcast, Ed is going to be sharing some of his favorite plants to grow and talking a bit about his life and his connection with plants. I'm so thrilled to be talking with you about plants this morning. You're a farmer, a poet, an activist, a permaculturist. You've spent a lot of your life working with plants.
Well, I remember my first garden when I was about... that I was more directly responsible for when I was about 10 years old, which is about a little bit more than 50 years ago. So if you guys can do the math out there and that are listening. So I've been kind of planting gardens for 50 years. I first started out growing chilies and tomatoes and radishes. Those were the first three things. That was my very, very first garden. It was probably about the size of a 10 by 10. The interesting thing when I just talk about plants, I remember the soil. And since that time of 10 years old, I in all those years, in my fingers and in my mind, when I touched the soils with my hands, I remember each one of those soils that I have grown gardens since the time I was 10 years old, all the way up till right now. I have grown a garden at a school and at my home, when the soils are very different and the plants respond differently to the different textures, different kinds of soils, silt, clay soils, and whatever nutrient material they might have in them. And every plant kind of has its preference. Some like sandies and sometimes like little clay, more soil. It's kind of like an experiment for these last 50 years, seeing what grows in what conditions, in what weather conditions, and planting times and all that. But basically, the point I was trying to say is I remember that original soil that I had planted in like it was yesterday. I might not remember what I did an hour ago, but I can remember the soil that I worked in 50 years ago, and all the soil since that time, and it's been a wonderful experience. Somebody might have worked in a garden in one soil for the rest of their life. That's a great experience too. If you just worked in this one soil, one climate, and you saw peaches growing for 50 years, that's a pretty good experience. But my experience has been with moving from garden, from place to place, again, since the time I was 10 years old.
So you remember the soil as much as the plants.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about how important soil is.
Well, it's everything. If you don't have soil, I've seen some people work with some really tough caliche soils, and so it's just a lot of work. And I'm kind of a farmer that I don't try to over input. I try to do the least amount of work and get the most out of the soils I can, and not. It's already a lot of work, so I try not to make it any more work. But I have been able to succeed in soils where somebody said it is caliche, or it's nothing will grow there, and you throw a little organic matter in there, a little bit of manure or something like that, a little compost. You can turn even some really stubborn, very poor soils into something good. It just takes a little bit longer. Ideally, you start with a soil that's pretty good foundation structure and good loam, something that's not overly sandy, not overly clay-like. Then you've got a really good soil to work with, and you start fixing it up and aging it like a glass of wine. You age it, and pretty soon that soil is alive with everything energy that plants need. And then the plants will respond through that soil health beneficial soil. It's alive. It feels that you can walk it. It's got energy. growing in a garden in the same spot, if you're doing good things and you work the soil when it's not too wet, not too dry, and you bring crop rotation in, you do let things grow according to what they want to do, and let plants seed where they want to, and let plants volunteer. You just get this whole natural jungle. I don't know how to describe it. It's energy where everything is growing where it wants to grow, not where I planted it, where it wants to grow. And it develops soil, and birds come around, and they becomes a whole bug. The bugs come around, and it's a whole biological world that wouldn't have been there if you didn't kind of throw a few amendments in there, maybe add a little water in there, and sing a little bit to the plant. It just wouldn't respond unless you had a little bit of our interaction in there.
We can play a positive role in amending the soil and making it healthier.
Oh yeah, I work at a school with we have 500 students. We compost like 5 buckets from the kitchen and what they don't eat in their lunches every day. It's a really neat little composting program that we got here. But we produce lots of compost, and we put them in the compost in our plants in the greenhouse, and then those plants go out to the garden with some of that compost. So I don't throw hardly a twig away. I compost every possible thing, when I can. And then down the other thing too is I just pretty much let things mulch and compost in the field, which is the ideal situation. But if you do have kitchen waste, you do have stuff that's coming an extra amount, you may not want to put it directly in your field. You could, but you always could compost it. So there's a number of ways to get that soil in better shape, but ultimately compost is probably the most critical thing in developing soils.
In college, I think you went to Cal Poly, and you met someone there, Raphael, who taught you about plants and kind of to see or to connect with plants in a different way. Can you just say a few words about that?
Okay. Well, I was kind of going to a mainstream school of agriculture, and as a boy, I worked on the farms and for production type farming. But the element that Raphael, which he's a whole character in himself and his life and everything, he's the one that was telling me first about blue corn, and then he had a variety of blue corn that he was growing in California. But he also was the one that told me to pray when I plant my corn, and so subsequently I've been doing that. And he told me that probably was about 40 years ago. So I kind of made that connection, and then it's always a new understanding about the spiritual understanding of plants. And then I have other people who have very specific songs for planting songs that I didn't get to learn them all. Some of them passed on. One of my teachers passed on, but that's always something that I incorporate in my work with the garden. And one thing for sure is that if you're kind of in a bad mood or you're not feeling well, maybe you should just not work with your garden as much. But I always find that I'm always in a good mood whenever I'm out in the garden. And I think the main thing is if you have good energy and you have a connection to the plants, that they sense that. They know that. And you might even say, hey, plant, you might not verbally say, hey, I think you're a very pretty plant and I love you. But the plant's going to sense that those are your feelings, because plants are very smart. Anyway, he was the very first one that told me about that, and I always liked gardening, but it's kind of brought something really home. So I just kind of been developing that connection, ever since. And he's one of my original teachers, and probably my best, my most favorite teacher.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like you've passed that knowledge on to others, because a lot of your work has been with juveniles, teaching children about gardening, teaching native peoples about gardening and growing their own food.
Yeah, I now it's juveniles. I work with them and with my own children, yes, and other workshops and trainings, permaculture training. Right now, I kind of have a really, really fun job. I work with about 500 students, kindergarten through 8th grade. So I have a pretty nice garden. We have a aquaculture program, growing tilapia, aquaponics. We have that's all in the greenhouse. We have a small orchard. We have a pretty good-sized garden. So all these kids get to come out there and put their hands in the soil, get a shovel, dig the weeds out, plant. I really enjoy that, particularly the first grade, second grade, kindergarten. Even though they are not able to do a lot of work for me because they're very little, but they come out and they'll pick carrots and it's a wonderful thing to teach kids that you can grow your own food. And otherwise they don't know that. Kids don't know that a carrot comes out of the ground, or if it comes off a tree, or you pick it off of a plant. But now they know that, because they go out there and every day they dig out carrots when they come out. Yeah, that's what it's all about. I mean, I've learned a lot. People have taught me a lot, and I've learned also that now it's very important that I pass this knowledge on to these young people, because we're the ones that have the knowledge. I mean, the guys at the universities, the extension services, they're good guys and they know a certain amount, but the practitioners who taught me and the basic people who have taught me who didn't go to college or not college professors, I've learned the most from them.
You mentioned this a bit, but why do you feel that it's so important to teach younger people about plants?
Well, I think even if they don't all become farmers, I think that their understanding with their connection to nature and plants and animals is going to make them a much more peaceful, less violent person. I think in this world today, there's a lot of violence, and I think a lot of that's because people are not connected to their environments. So once they see a small animal and they pick up a chicken, a little duck, or a little turkey, or they pick a carrot out of the ground, or pick a peach off the tree, I think it's going to change the energy that they might have, because everybody has a negative and positive energy. We just have to keep reminding ourselves to be positive. And there's a lot of issues with young people, not only in this reservation school I work with, but all over the world. And then I've had good experiences in teaching agriculture in other parts of the world. But I would say that if they don't all understand, they're not all going to farm. They're all going to eat, and so they're going to have a better appreciation for the food that they eat because of their little class that they took out in our gardening school here.
So Ed, you also were involved with nativeseeds.org, and you've been working a lot with seed saving. Can you share just a couple things about seeds with our listeners?
That's been a real big deal amongst a lot of my colleagues, and I respect that. And I have a closet full of eons of seeds, and I have to go in there once in a while and investigate. But the thing is that when you're saving seeds, you have to know which ones cross. And there's certain techniques of all the different seeds to ensure that they're going to be healthy, so they're not mixed with a different kind of seed. And it's the same thing. If you want to grow healthy plants, you have to have healthy seeds. And then the other thing is that seeds acclimate to their conditions after 3 or 4 years growing in the same environment. They're going to be better adapted to your very particular small garden plot or big garden plot. That's a very unique place in the whole world. You go a mile down the road, and the conditions are going to be a little bit different. Or on the other side of the mountain, 20 miles away, the conditions are going to be different. So that's why certain ones we have to save seeds for, like for example corn, because that's not one that just grows by itself and plants itself. Other things such as lettuce, I rarely plant them because they just come up all over. They're like weeds, and I have plenty of lettuce. So I don't necessarily have to save seeds from every single crop, but corns we do, beans of course, and so on the seed saving thing again, for example, if you save seeds from any of the kind of melons, ideally you just let those. It kind of sounds gross, but you let those ferment in their juices, and when you take out the melon, you take out all that grungy stuff that goes with it, and you put them in a bucket and let them kind of ferment for a few days. That's a little trick that seed companies don't do, but we home gardeners can do it, and that makes those seeds very, very strong. And I've had seeds that usually, if melon seeds only last for 2 or 3 years, and then they're no good anymore. But I've had seeds of that, melon seeds that I've grown, some heirloom types that are 12, 13, 14 years old that are very, very good seeds as of today that we just planted a week ago. So there's a little few tricks to it, and certain kind of seeds, especially the traditional crops, melons, beans, squashes, corns. Those are the ones that I primarily focus on. Yeah, I work with native seed search. They're doing a wonderful job saving seeds. So if I kind of had a fire and my seeds burned, or some got eaten by rats or whatever, or they just got old, I can go to native seed search, and they're nice people. I can get some more seeds from them, because that's their focus is banking seeds and getting them out to native farmers and other people that can grow them so that they don't become extinct, which we do have a lot of old varieties, traditional varieties that, we don't know what happened to them. Maybe somebody's growing them somewhere, but we don't know where.
And you have worked a lot with native indigenous people in the U.S. and Mexico and Central and South America, I believe.
Yeah, out of my real fun experience was going to Africa, and I hope to go to Africa again someday. Next month, I'm going to teach a short course in Colombia. But yes, I've done work in Mexico, in Argentina, in different parts of the United States. It's all right, but it takes a lot of time to go out and teach all over the place. And I'm not one of those that goes on the tour these days. I pretty much prefer to stay growing my own garden. And that's where I'm learning. I mean, I feel like I know a lot, but I'm also feel like I have lots more to learn.
So wonderful, Ed. And how has permaculture tied into your work? Is it an integral part of your work, would you say?
That's a whole other interesting little area, is the design concepts of everything that you live, how you live and how you go to work every day, and how do you live in your home. So I've done some alternative buildings out of straw, out of papercrete, out of mud, out of adobe, cob. And so those are some things that, if you're a very poor man like me, you can find ways to make homes and build things and fix things so that they're a little more energy efficient. And some of the things that we do, like the grapes thing, I don't know if we're going to get into grapes, but I like growing them because they make shade onto my house. At the same time, I can go and reach and pick the grapes from the outside of the doorstep of my home. But I use those grapes to shade not only my home, but when I want to sit outside, there's a nice shady area that I can sit under the grapes. So I'm not growing them like a hedge, I'm growing them like a roof. And so it's a little process in training them, but they're very beautiful. And my grapes are just starting to develop right now, and in a few years, if somebody will want to look to see where I live, they won't be able to see it because it'll be all covered up by grapes and everything else.
They'll be like, we think we see Ed. Is that him amidst that?
Yeah, I think he's back there in that plant somewhere.
Oh, that's so great. So Ed, let's talk about peaches. I know you grow them. Can you tell our listeners about peaches, what you like about them to start with, and then we'll get more into the details about them.
I started growing peaches in an orchard about 10 or 15 years ago, and there was about 30 trees that I inherited, and but they told me that these trees had Texas root rot. But I did my research and did some things to figure out how to keep these trees alive and get crops growing, some harvest out of them. And so we did. We lost some of the trees. We lost 10 trees early on, and then 20 trees survived very well. I had to prune them and thin them and do all these things, and we got wonderful, wonderful crops out of them. So that was my one of my first sort of real things with. They do well out here, and at that time there was only a few varieties that I knew of. Now there's some introductions coming out of, I believe, Iran, perhaps Israel, that are desert-type varieties that do well under low chill conditions. So now I probably have in my home probably 8 different varieties of peaches.
Wow.
That are coming on. My first 3-year-old tree has just really produced a lot. We just ate a lot of it, and next year we should have a huge, huge crop of peaches coming on. The blossoms on it are wonderful to look at when they blossom, and I have one that has red blossoms on it called Red Baron, which I read in the magazine. If you didn't even get any peaches, just looking at the red blossoms is fun enough.
Tell our listeners where you're located, what the climate's like, and then what are the needs of peach trees?
We're growing out here in the Phoenix Valley. I'm growing on the Salt River Indian Reservation on some land that belongs to my son. And so it's a very hot environment, and then the cold is fairly cold. We get some freezing temperatures during the winter, but what most of the stone fruits, such as plums, pears, peaches, apricots, they like a certain amount of chill hours. So certain varieties will do well under our amount of chill hours that we got, which I think is some hours of temperature under, I think, 40 or 45 degrees. So you're limited by the number of varieties. So I think now they've developed some new varieties. We possibly could grow 15 to 20 varieties, which is kind of fun. And so what happens is that the harvest time of the peaches will come on early May, and then some will come on in middle May, and then some come on the end of May. So that allows you a little bit more time to enjoy your harvest and get to it. But if you were like a production out there, growing peaches for money, you would probably want them all to be ready at one time, and you would harvest them all at one time. But that's not my case. I just grow peaches because I like to. So they're desert varieties that do well, and some of the varieties that grow well in the northern cooler climates wouldn't do well here, and vice versa. Ours wouldn't do well up there.
You can grow it in a lot of different climates.
Oh yes.
And then what are some of the needs of this plant? How do you ensure that your peach is going to be healthy?
Going back to the Texas root rot thing, I think if you which we're all susceptible to because it's something that grows a lot around the rivers. Wherever cotton was grown, there's a lot of Texas root rot, which is cotton was grown in every part of this valley pretty much. Basically, the same things that you do for just about any plant is compost. We get a lot of coffee grounds from coffee stores and put that out there to add structure to it. So the worms come in there and eat the coffee grounds and provide worm castings. We put a little bit of a mulch in there. I weed kind of heavily because I like to watch, make sure gophers are not coming. But once my trees are established, I kind of start under the canopy of the trees. I let different things grow there, which would bring beneficial insects and butterflies and bees and all that. The key components of the new style, or the thing that we're doing now with peaches, is we're pruning them very low with an open canopy and not letting the peach trees get big so that you have to get a ladder up there to harvest them. We keep them pruned down heavily. We prune twice a year. We prune in the winter and then in the summer. And then you have to thin them because if there's like 6-8 peaches growing on one little small branch, you have to thin them to, like they say, 3. So you have 3 big peaches instead of 8 little ones, the same amount of peaches, but just people want to eat a bigger peach, which is, I think we all like to do that instead of eating 3 little ones. So thinning, pruning, and they take a fair amount of water, and again, keep the soil in good shape. Try to take advantages of rainwater when it comes, irrigation water when it comes, and whatever we're trying to do. But they like water in the summertime about every 10 days.
If someone wants to start growing peaches, what's your advice?
Well, I went to a conference one time, and they had wonderful advice for anybody. To answer your question, they would say, and this probably goes for many crops, say whether it be garlic or whatever, is develop your soil for 1, 2, if possible 3 years before you plant anything. And seems like a long time, but it really, time goes pretty fast. That would be a recommendation, is to start with building your soil and making sure it doesn't have any invasive weeds such as Bermuda grass, morning glory, or nutgrass, and there's others invasive weeds. You're going to get other kind of weeds, but those are not as much problem. So you develop your soils, keep it weed-free, make sure there's no gophers around, and then I would say kind of start small. Start with a small amount of trees and see how you do with them, see how much work it is. The more you start to enjoy your plant therapy program, you realize you want to try another variety and try another variety. And so I would say that develop your soils, start small, and don't overdo it, because if you're overwhelmed, then you're going to stress. So do what you can handle, and if you've got the means, you can want to plant 300 trees in, and I would say good luck. It's certainly something you could make money in, but they do ask like $3 a pound out here, which is a lot of money for. But they're very good. When you go homegrown peaches are going to taste better than anything you could ever buy at the store. Exactly,
it's so true. Much, much better. So anything else you want to add about peaches?
No, just that you better eat them fresh than if you bake them and put a bunch of butter and flour and make a pie out of them. But But if somebody out there wants to make me a pie with my peaches, that's okay too. I'll eat them.
So listeners, if you're close to Ed and you hear that, he's open to peach pies.
Well, I'll accept that. I'll have no problem with that.
So Ed, tell us about some of the other plants that you love to grow.
I would say chilies is something I like to grow. What I kind of like growing about chilies is there's always new varieties. Again, I don't know how many there are. I'm going to guess hundreds. And I've probably in my lifetime grown 40 or 50 different kinds of chilies. And that's the fun part, is finding out which ones do very well. Some give chilies really early in the season and produce for a longer period of time. Some are harder to pick than others. They take more time to pick. Some are good to dry, which is my favorite kind, is the ones that you can dry and then you can have chilies all year round. They all have different flavors. Some are very hot. Some are even, all the hot ones are going to have different flavors. I have some chili plants that it's kind of unheard about here in the desert because it gets so cold. But I grow in microclimates, and so they stay warm during the winter. And I have some chili plants that have been growing for 3 years. They're fun to look at. They have different colors, and they're very strong-looking plants.
I thought chilies were more annuals.
They were actually really all perennials, and so are tomatoes in their native climate, which is a climate that doesn't freeze much. That's what's kind of shocking for some of us. There's some that are kind of just more good, well known as perennials, but more or less they are all perennials. Again, some of the standard varieties, such as maybe jalapenos, they're not going to do well the second year because they've just been designed and bred for high production, and then they replace them. But if you're growing some of the other obscure varieties, they're going to be very productive in the second or third year if you don't have a harsh winter. And again, our winters are harsh, but I'm growing them under tree canopies around other plants. The weeds grow up around them and protect them from the cold. And so it's kind of fun that I go around my yard and I get behind in my weed and I see a really nice chili plant that's growing amongst a bunch of weeds or something. And there's one that I don't think it's called Rainbow Inca or something. I don't know what but it's got purple, yellow, orange chilies, and they're very small. They're pretty tasty, but they're very pretty to look at. They run my walkway up to my home. So that's a very fun plant to grow. I've had that one for 3 years. And then the other one that does very well is called a kung pao. And it'll withstand a little bit more colder temperatures than some of the other chilies. And it'll produce for 2 or 3 years. There's other chilies like bell peppers that are more frost sensitive. More likely you're not going to get those to grow from the second or third year. And I don't mind bell peppers. They're all right, and I like growing them, but I kind of prefer the ones that I can dry and eat green or eat red. And like I said, one of my most favorites is called the kung pao. That just produces much chilies, pounds and pounds. And another one's called Red Bomb. It's an early producer. There's many varieties, and I'm just going off the top of my head, and I don't remember them all.
And then as far as water needs, what do they need for water?
They enjoy water. In the desert, it's pretty hard to overwater anything. They enjoy a lot of water. So that's a critical thing, is harvesting water and keep having mulch under your plants so that the water does not evaporate. So there's things you can do to keep the chili plants happy, but definitely they're going to like a fair amount of water. But if you kind of forget to water them once in a while, they're pretty resilient plants. They won't die on you or nothing. They're pretty tough. They can go sometimes with a forgetful farmer like me that doesn't water them sometimes, and that's kind of another reason why I like them. They're just very tough plants, and they're very forgiving.
Do you have a drying method for drying chilies that you recommend or that you prefer?
Some of them are going to be easier to dry, that they have a thin skin on them, and so those you wouldn't have to put them in the oven at low temperature or in a dehydrator machine. You can just put them out on your table in the shade of your house or in the kitchen. You just spread them out. After a few days, they dry out real quick because they have a thin skin, and then when they're completely dry, you put them away and you have them for whatever you want to eat them with. I've also done canning too. I have canned chilies from 3 or 4 years ago. That's kind of fun too. Making salsa and making canned chilies.
So anything else you want to add about chilies?
No, but other than to say, I'd probably make the best salsa in the Southwest, and nobody else makes salsa outside of Southwest, so it doesn't matter. But I'm a good chili maker.
I wish we could try it, Ed. Are you?
Yeah, I wrote an article years ago in a magazine called Herbal Magazine about chilies, but I need to write them another one because that was about 15 years ago, and I already know so much more about chilies now.
Are there any other plants you want to share with our listeners?
I guess I might touch on garlic. Again, the garlic is one of those. It's hard, soft mix. There's all different kinds. They taste different. They look different. And when you're good at it, one of my sons is pretty good. You can look at a garlic on the top and say, I know what kind of garlic it is. I could look at the leaves of that tomato plant and I know what kind of tomato plant it is. But the garlic is one of those that I got inspired years ago from a guy. I can't remember his name. I read his book. And I was like, it's hard to live growing your own food. It kind of seems like it's difficult, but it is not. It is and it isn't. I don't know how to say it, but now I'm at the point where most of my food needs are outside the door of my home, and I don't have to go to the store. That's what's most exciting for me. I could grow 40 acres of carrots and make some money. That's not as exciting as being able to go outside my door and get a piece of parsley, get a garlic, get a tomato, get an onion, an eggplant, and put it in and cook it, pick it, and 10 minutes later cook it. So that's what's most exciting. And I've learned about things such as garlic and onions. Don't get in a hurry to pick them. Just let them stay out there. When you're ready to eat, just go out and eat them fresh. So I'm not so much into, I'm going to store, 100 bags, 50 pounds of onions for the rest of the year. I don't need to do that. I'll just let them leave out in the field, and whenever I want to pick one, I'll just go outside and pick one straight out of the garden.
So it sounds like you have a wide variety of plants growing in your garden.
Quite a bit, and there's some things that I never planted. There was some watermelons that have been coming around for the last couple of years. I don't know who brought them over there, but they grow all over the place. Birds, I guess, could eat a watermelon in the neighbor's yard, I guess, and come over and poop in my yard and bring some seeds in that poop. I don't know how they get there, but...
or they just want to be in your yard. They're like, we want to go over there.
I guess. I mean, there's some fun things that just show up in my yard. I mean, I had date trees that came in there. I didn't plant it. There's a lot of things that are growing in the yard that I didn't plant. So that's the fun part. Every time I go out there, it's a discovery world.
And so you've been working with plants for years, and you're still learning from the plants.
That's what's so exciting. I certainly got a lot to learn.
So Ed, any other plants you'd want to talk about today while we have you here on the line?
Oh, I think that's kind of it. I think I grow a lot of citrus, figs, pomegranates. Pomegranates is a fun one because there's probably 50 varieties of pomegranates, different colors, different shapes. You kind of just explore. You're going to find usually that with any plant there's many, many varieties, not just a white and a red pomegranate. There's hundreds of them. Pomegranates are kind of fun to grow these days. I'm challenged by the pears to see if I'm going to get any pears. I haven't got any pears yet. Apricots are very tasty. So many things.
And how large of a piece of land are you growing all this on?
Well, I got like about an acre right now. And I have another acre and a half that I could plant, but I'm trying not to get carried away. But probably in the next few years, I'll be growing another acre.
That is fabulous. So if someone was listening right now and they thought, I really would love to ask Ed some questions or connect, how can they find you or contact you?
Email is a good way. That's kind of the old school way, but email works for me.
And what is your email?
It's TNAFAAZ@yahoo.com.
Okay, so that's TNAFAAZ@yahoo.com?
Yep.
Okay, perfect, Ed. And anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we sign off today?
No, just keep composting and have fun.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk again.
Okay, thanks.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening. Our first documentary, The Soil Solution, is now available at sustainableworldmedia.com. The Soil Solution is a 28-minute documentary film that explores the potential that healthy soil may hold in reversing climate change. If you visit sustainableworldmedia.com, you can view it online and also purchase it. Thanks so much for your support.